Long before anyone spoke of the Antichrist, the world had already met his prototype. A king so deranged he slaughtered babies in the streets, desecrated the temple of God, and declared himself the deity the Jews must worship. His name was Antiochus Epiphanes, and history tried to erase what he did. But prophecy didn't forget him. If you've made it this far, thank you. Most people click away long before the truth gets uncomfortable. If you want more stories like this, more hidden history, more forgotten villains, more prophecies most people never hear, make sure you subscribe and tap the like button. Your support helps bring these dark chapters of history back into the light. Jerusalem had seen war before, but never madness. When Antiochus marched into the city, he didn't come as a conqueror. He came as a butcher. The ground trembled beneath the boots of his soldiers, their armor clattering like a storm rolling through stone alleys. But it wasn't the army the people feared. It was the man leading them. Antiochus sat atop his war horse with the cold stillness of a statue, surveying the city as though he were assessing a thing he already owned. There was a disturbing calm about him, the calm of someone who no longer saw other humans as human at all. Then the slaughter began. Soldiers tore families from their homes. Mothers clutched babies as doors were kicked off hinges. Elderly men were dragged into the streets, beaten, discarded like refuse. Homes were set ablaze while their owners still hid inside. Screams carried through the city like a single continuous wail. The smoke of burning wood mixed with the metallic scent of blood. Streets that once echoed with prayer now echoed with terror. This wasn't strategy. This wasn't conquest. This was a message. Bow to me or be erased. And Antiochus watched it unfold with the detached interest of a man observing a storm he himself commanded. But this cruelty didn't come from nowhere. Something had snapped inside him, a fracture carved not by Jerusalem, but by Rome. Before the slaughter, there was a circle in the sand. Antiochus had marched into Egypt full of pride, expecting another effortless expansion of his empire. But Rome, a rising power he hadn't yet learned to fear, sent a single envoy named Gaius Popilius Lanus. The old Roman approached without fear, unrolling a message from the Senate and demanding that Antiochus withdraw. When the king hesitated, Lanus drew a circle around him in the sand with the tip of his staff. "Give Rome your answer," he said, "before you step outside this line." The world seemed to freeze. Antiochus, a man raised to believe gods walked in his bloodstream, stood trapped inside a circle drawn by a single old man. His generals watched. His soldiers watched. The Romans watched. And the king of the Seleucid Empire, the self-proclaimed God Manifest, had no choice but to bow without bowing. He stepped backward, retreating not only from Egypt, but from the illusion of his own invincibility. That moment broke him. Humiliation sank into his bones like poison, turning pride into obsession, obsession into fury, and fury into madness. The man who returned from Egypt was no longer a king. He was a wounded predator, and Jerusalem became the prey he chose to bleed. His rage carried him straight into the heart of the city's faith, the temple, the holiest place the Jews possessed, a place believed to hold the very presence of God. Antiochus stormed through its gates with soldiers behind him and hatred burning like a fever in his eyes. He moved with a chilling purpose, as if fulfilling a script written in his mind long before he arrived. They dragged a pig, an unclean animal, to the altar. Priests were beaten, bound, forced to their knees as Antiochus approached the sacred place with a twisted calmness, almost serene in his desecration. The pig's squeals echoed against the stone walls as the unclean sacrifice was offered. Blood fell where only holy offerings had been meant to stand. The priests wept, the soldiers laughed, and Antiochus watched, not with anger but with satisfaction, as if this violation fed something deep within him. Then he ordered something far worse. A statue of Zeus was raised inside the temple, but not the Zeus the Greeks worshipped. This one bore the face of Antiochus himself, an idol of a man who demanded to be called God manifest. There was no rage in his eyes now, only certainty, a terrifying certainty. He didn't just want power, he wanted divinity. He needed it to cover the wound Rome left inside him, and he would drown a nation to prove it. Antiochus left the temple with a sense of triumph, as though he had defeated something cosmic, something that wasn't merely human. But desecration was only the beginning. His hunger for control, the hunger born from humiliation, needed more than altars and idols. He wanted to remake Jerusalem in his own image, and so fear became his weapon. It started with laws. Scripture was outlawed. Scrolls were seized and burned in public squares. The words that had carried a nation through exile and empire became ash in the wind. Circumcision, the ancient sign of covenant, was banned under penalty of death. Mothers who circumcised their sons were paraded through the streets before being executed, their babies taken from their arms as warnings to anyone who dared resist. The Sabbath was forbidden. Prayer was forbidden. The teaching of Scripture was forbidden. Even owning a scroll was enough to get an entire family dragged into the open and executed without trial. Jerusalem became a place where whispering the name of God felt like a crime, because it was. But Antiochus's cruelty was not the loud, impulsive cruelty of a tyrant. It was organized, measured, administered like policy. Soldiers patrolled markets, checking for signs of Jewish practice, ritual food, traditional clothing, even familiar greetings. Anything that smelled of identity was marked for destruction. Synagogues were stripped and turned into shrines of Zeus. Jewish priests were replaced with Hellenistic loyalists. Children were forced to learn Greek philosophy under threat of punishment. Antiochus didn't want obedience. He wanted transformation. He wanted the city's soul. Slowly, Jerusalem became a place where mistrust dwelled behind every doorway, where neighbors avoided each other's eyes, where faith retreated underground into whispers, shadows, and caves. And as the city suffered, Antiochus sank deeper into his delusion. He began to see himself not merely as a king, but as a divine figure, a god whose will was unquestionable, whose authority was cosmic. He started speaking of destiny, of fate aligning with his hand, of the world bending toward his divine purpose. But beneath this grand divine facade lay the painful truth. A man broken by Rome, desperate to rebuild himself into something unbreakable. He forced Jerusalem to endure his reconstruction, and prophecy had warned of someone just like him. Centuries before Antiochus walked the earth, Daniel wrote of a ruler who would rise with furious hatred against the holy people. A king who would exalt himself above every god, who would desecrate the sanctuary and wage war on the faithful with a cruelty the world had never seen. When Antiochus seized the temple, the Jews remembered Daniel's words, and many believed that the prophecy had awakened in their lifetime. Because Antiochus wasn't just behaving like a tyrant, he was behaving like a prophecy. He declared himself divine, He desecrated the holy place. He waged war on the faithful. He wasn't just oppressing a people. He was reenacting a script that had been written centuries before. His cruelty became a shadow, a pattern, a blueprint. And though Antiochus thought he held Jerusalem in his fist, something was stirring beyond the walls, something he could not crush with laws or soldiers. The resistance. It began quietly. Farmers whispering prayers in barns after extinguishing their lanterns, shepherds carrying scraps of scripture hidden inside their garments, old priests teaching forbidden commandments to children in underground chambers. Faith recoiled like a wounded animal, not dead, but waiting. And then came a man who lit the spark, Judas Maccabeus. He was not a king, not a general, not a noble, but he was a fighter, a man who had watched his people suffer and refused to bow. At first, the resistance was only a rumor, a few men ambushing patrols, burning supply wagons, vanishing into the hills before soldiers could retaliate. But whisper by whisper, raid by raid, victory by small victory, Judas gathered followers, farmers who knew the terrain, priests who knew the scripture, shepherds who knew how to move silently in the night. Their faith became their weapon, their grief became their fire, and their fury became their shield. Antiochus laughed at them at first, peasants with knives trying to challenge a king. But every empire underestimates its spark before the fire comes. The resistance grew bold. They targeted outposts, cut off reinforcements, sabotaged communication lines. The hills around Jerusalem became a battlefield Antiochus could not control. And while the rebels rose in the shadows, Antiochus's mind began to unravel. His identity, the grand illusion that he was a god, started to fracture under the weight of fear and paranoia. He began to hear rumors of rebellion as personal insult. Whispers of Jews still praying felt like challenges to his divine status. Every act of resistance felt like Rome mocking him. And so he ordered more cruelty, more punishment, more death, believing that if he just crushed hard enough, the world would bend again. But cruelty is a double-edged blade. The more he swung it, the more it cut him. Far from Jerusalem, as he prepared another campaign, Antiochus fell ill. Witnesses later wrote that it came upon him swiftly, a fever that shook his body, a pain that twisted his features, a creeping decay that left him unable to stand. His servants reported that he cried out in delirium, speaking of shadows following him, of divine judgment, of faces he had ordered killed. He died screaming, not in battle, not in glory, but in agony, alone, broken and forgotten by the empire he tried to reshape in his image. But the terror he embodied did not die with him. It lingered. In prophecy, in memory, in the blueprint he left behind. A blueprint Daniel warned would rise again. The death of Antiochus brought relief to Jerusalem, but only for a moment, because the people soon realized something unsettling. His life, his rise, his cruelty. None of it felt random. None of it felt isolated in history. Instead, it felt familiar, patterned, as if he were following a script older than himself. Daniel had written about a king centuries before Antiochus was even born, a king who would attack the holy people, who would defy the Most High, who would exalt himself above every god and desecrate the sanctuary with a hatred the world had never seen. When Antiochus stormed the temple, when he demanded worship, when he declared himself divine, the parallels were impossible to ignore. And so the people asked, Was Antiochus the fulfillment of the prophecy, or merely the warning? The truth that history held in its shadows was far more chilling. Antiochus was not the prophecy fulfilled. He was the rehearsal, a prototype, a preview, a living foreshadow of a tyrant who would one day rise not over a single nation, but over the entire world. Daniel wrote that the real figure would ascend when the world felt safe, stable, unified. A leader who would promise peace, offer solutions, and win the trust of nations before revealing the cruelty hidden beneath his charm. Antiochus had forced obedience with swords. The next tyrant, prophecy says, will not need steel. He will use deception, charisma, influence powerful enough to reshape reality itself. Antiochus banned scripture and prayer. The future tyrant will attempt to rewrite truth on a global scale. Antiochus raised a statue with his own face in the temple. The prophecy says the future ruler will stand in the holy place and declare himself divine. Antiochus hunted the faithful through the streets of Jerusalem. The final tyrant will persecute believers worldwide. Antiochus ruled for a season. The real figure will dominate an entire age. The shadow Antiochus cast stretches beyond empires and centuries, a dark imprint on the world's story, a foreshadow of a future the prophets described with trembling pens. And for the first time in human history, the world is now capable of receiving such a ruler. Because Antiochus needed armies. He needed riders, swords, soldiers, messengers. He needed time, distance, and force to exert control. But today, authority travels faster than thought. A single leader could control information, currency, movement, identity, belief, instantly, globally. Governments now possess tools Antiochus could never have imagined. Databases that track entire populations, systems that monitor compliance, networks that spread information and erase it with equal speed. Antiochus had to burn scrolls one by one. Today, entire libraries can be deleted with a keystroke. He had to march soldiers into homes to enforce obedience. Today, compliance can be monitored through screens, systems, and silent permissions that determine who may buy, who may sell, who may move, who may belong. For the first time in history, a single authority could reach into the lives of billions without ever lifting a sword. Daniel's blueprint, once dismissed as impossible, now aligns disturbingly well with the world that exists today. And prophecy says, the final figure will use this world to rise, not through war, but through promise, not through fear, but through hope, not through brutality, but through charisma powerful enough to convince nations that he alone can fix what is broken. And once the world trusts him, once the nations embrace him, the prophecy says he will reveal the same cruelty that lived inside Antiochus, but magnified, global, unchecked, a terror unlike anything Jerusalem endured, a man who will stand in the holy place and call himself God, a ruler who will demand worship, a king who will wage war on the faithful with a ferocity that makes Antiochus look insignificant. We look back at Antiochus as a madman, a tyrant, a villain drenched in delusion and blood. But prophecy looks at him differently, not as the final threat, but as the warning. A shadow of something greater, a blueprint of something darker, a rehearsal for a figure still to come. And when you step back, when you look at the systems in place, the technology that governs our lives, the desperation for a leader who promises unity, the shape of the shadow comes into focus. Antiochus was limited by the world he was born into, but the world the prophecy describes, the world we live in now, is ready for a ruler with far greater reach. A world where a single leader could rise above nations, declare himself the answer, and hold the kind of power that Antiochus spent his life chasing. A world where controlling truth is as easy as controlling a network. A world where devotion can be measured digitally. A world where a man could be worshipped not through temples, but through systems. The tyrant Daniel warned about has not yet appeared, but the world he needs is already here. The systems, the structure, the desperation for peace, the hunger for unity, the aching desire for a single figure to solve what feels unsolvable. Antiochus was only the shadow. The real figure is still coming.